Hello and welcome. Um, my name is Emily Abzak. I'm an instructor in the Department of Cinema Studies and Moving Image Arts here at CU Boulder. And thank you all of you who are joining us today. Also a special thank you to the Rosa Visiting Artist Endowment and to Jason Phelps, who is helping us. This is actually our first StreamYard live stream, so we're trying it out. I'm so pleased to have with us today our guest, Nancy Schreiber, ASC, and Jonah Markowitz, who's the production designer and cinematographer for the Mapplethorpe biopic, directed by Ondi Timoner. So I'd like to start by reading your bios. Timoner, Ondi. All right. So we'll start off. I'd like to read your bios, and then we'll say hello and look at the trailer for Mapplethorpe today. So let's start with you, Nancy. I'm going to switch in between the bio that you sent me. Nancy Schreiber, ASC, is an award-winning cinematographer based in Los Angeles and New York. She was the fourth ever woman voted into the membership of the prestigious American Society of Cinematographers and the first to receive the ASC's President's Award in 2017. I just have to stop there and give Nancy a round of applause for that. It's such a huge accomplishment, and it's really fabulous to have you here with us today. So Nancy was also honored with the Best Dramatic Cinematography Award at Sundance for November, and also shared that award for My America or Honk If You Love Buddha. Nancy has garnered Emmy nominations for Best Cinematography on HBO's Celluloid Closet and was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award for Chain of Desire. And she was also one of Variety's 10 DPs to watch. Now, Nancy, her bio is so long. The other things that I'd like to note is that recently she was a cinematographer for the critically acclaimed Linda Ronstadt documentary, Sound of My Voice. And she also was the cinematographer for Mapplethorpe, the film we'll be discussing today, for Moving Parts, which was my a narrative feature film, and The Nines, directed by John August, who, interestingly enough, is from Boulder as well, and we went to the same high school. Very good. Small world. So Nancy's also taught cinematography at the American Film Institute and has guest lectured extensively worldwide. She's on the board of ASC for 7 years and also the board of New York Women in Film and Television. Is that correct, Nancy? Yep. And the foundation of board of Women in Film. So she's also a member of the Television Academy and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Nancy. So happy to have you here.
I'm so delighted to be with Jonah, and also at a school that still loves celluloid and was started that way. Stan Brackage, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So over to you, Jonah. Jonah, am I correct that you are from Boulder, Colorado? You were born in New York,
I am.
but raised in Boulder. So
I was raised in
Jonah,
Boulder,
Jonah's been designing and art directing independent feature films, studio art, television shows, as well as commercials for the past 12 years. His recent credits include Mapplethorpe, HBO's Room 104, and A Futile and Stupid Gesture. Other credits include The Diary of a Teenage Girl, Hollywood Adventures, the Sundance Jury and Audience Award-winning film, Quincera, We Are Marshall, Rocky Balboa, The Help, Alpha Dog, A Lot Like Love, The House of Sand and Fog, Blue Crush, and Crazy Beautiful. He's also written and directed short and feature films, including he just finished an artist residency at San Francisco Film Society, where he completed the screenplay for his next feature film, Start at an End. Is this still your next feature film, Jonah?
It's actually a television show we're developing right now.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, great. That'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about that. And then are you still in post-production on Political Animals?
No, that's come out.
It's come out.
Film that's come out, yeah.
Okay, Great. So Jonah graduated from the film department at Emerson College and also studied art in the Netherlands, as well as film theory and production at FAMU in the Czech Republic. So that'll be interesting to hear a little bit about your international education. So again, welcome to you both. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your background and how with the Mapplethorpe film, and then we'll show the trailer.
Thank you again. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I have to say, I didn't know Jonah before we came together. I knew Ondi Timoner, really had never worked with her. She's a very well-known documentarian, has the distinction of being the only one to have won at Sundance the grand jury award for documentaries twice. So this was her first narrative, and Jonah, Ondi, and I first met together in Los Angeles talking about Mapplethorpe and various references we saw. Jonah, take it over.
So I came on board to Mapplethorpe. I got this job, or I got this opportunity. I saw that it was being made, and I just was instantly so intrigued and really wanted to be a part of it. I have a background in directing as well as production design. I grew up in an artistic family. My mom owned a gallery. I've always known about Mapplethorpe, and I was really excited to possibly work on it. So I remember meeting on it and just being so excited, meeting Ondi, and then I got to meet Nancy, who is just the most incredible cinematographer. Has been such a pleasure to work with her. I hope we get to work together again. And we really started down the road to building this incredible period film, shot on film, that I think we've all become really proud of.
Thank you. Jason, let's have a look at the trailer for those of us who haven't seen the film yet.
My name's Patty Smith, and I'm here with Robert Mapplethorpe. You may not know us yet, but we're going to be big stars. Only today we don't have any money.
I want to be a modern Michelangelo.
And you think if Michelangelo had a camera, he wouldn't have used it?
In church, I found God, and then Polaroid. It led me straight to the devil.
Your work is so raw.
We're making history here.
I can't sell this. I can't even show them.
Is this the shy pornographer?
Who's asking?
I'm a collector.
Sell the public my flowers, and then they can hang them on their walls without realizing what it is they're embracing. I'd love to take your photograph.
You're perfect.
Do they speak to you?
Even that which we deem obscene, you make look more beautiful than I thought possible.
You scared of dying?
Only before I'm famous.
You don't love anyone, you love yourself.
Don't go. No. Photography, it's about light, it's about composition, it's about the personality of the subject. I'm an artist. I would have been a painter, but the camera was invented.
What gives you solace?
Beauty, knowing that my work will outlive me.
Beautiful. I love the film. I thought it was really touching and beautifully shot and art directed. So just a reminder to everyone in the audience, you can ask questions in the comments, and then Jason will filter those into me, and then I can ask them to Nancy and or Jonah. So, I mean, I think the question on everyone's minds, really the main question that came to my mind after watching this film is, how did you recreate this time period in New York right now? Where did you shoot? And for both of you, and Jonah, I know you did a lot of research and that you went to the Mapplethorpe Foundation. How did you create this aesthetic for the film, the palette, the level of research? But maybe first we can go into where in New York did you shoot this film?
So we did decide to shoot the film in New York, which is not always what people do now for New York period films. When you're outside on the street in New York now, there's so much that's modern that's just really hard to take away, like city bikes and bus stops and things like that, that a lot of people are shooting in Philadelphia or shooting in Cleveland or shooting in different places. But we really did want to shoot in New York City. And Ondi was pretty intent on shooting in New York City. So we shot all over, in every borough, all over the city, recreating different locations, a lot of sort of iconic locations like the Chelsea Hotel, Max's Kansas City, stuff like that. So a lot of research, but they all had to be done in new places and in new ways. So location scouting and research was just a huge, huge part of the process to find all of these locations to be able to replicate. And that was sort of how we started and where we shot it.
Yes, in fact, the Chelsea Hotel was under renovation, and we found this old mansion up in Yonkers, New York. Anybody know? It's up near the Bronx. And the views of the windows, it was all open. So, we were a pretty low budget film, I have to say. And I think we had like 70 locations, Jonah, something like that. Company moves. It was intense. And so we knew that something would have to happen outside the window of the Chelsea Hotel where Patty and Robert were living. And we were so low budget, I remember we had to do it as a lock-off, which you don't have to do for VFX so much anymore, but we did. And they put the city in there. But I also I remember we were downtown in Manhattan. Jonah and I were there telling production, here's this beautiful location and it doesn't have any construction or modern buildings. So easy to put a VFX of the old New York there. But I remember we really had to fight to get that done. It was interesting. It was all budget. We shot in 19 days and, we could have used more time and money. Jonah was such a dream. You just made my life possible to create, this vision, where we didn't look that low budget, but we were.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, the relationship between a production designer and a director of photography is such an important one. And when you click in the way that Nancy and I did, it just makes the whole process so wonderful when you're both really working towards the same look and you understand each other's language and I understand what things are going to shoot like, and she understands how things are going to shoot and what my work's going to look like. And we just really had a simpatico relationship from the beginning, which really helped things. We shot this on film, and knowing that we shot this on film, it was always my intention to really make this look like a 1970s film, not to look like a film that was done in present day to look like the 70s, but to actually make it look like all those 70s films that are so great. And just seeing the trailer again, when I look at it, I think we pulled it off, and that was always our intention, and it was just great to work together.
Maybe you two can address a little bit how for the students who are here today, that relationship more between the production designer and the cinematographer, that you're basically two of the key creatives. When do you start talking in the process, and are you talking every day? And are you just making decisions together? How and where does the director fit into that?
So we talk every day. Definitely during prep is when we do our work together. Most of my work as a production designer, my work with the director and the DP really happens before we start shooting, when we're finding locations, doing research, coming up with the palette, deciding what we want things to look like, figuring out where we're going to shoot and how we're going to augment those spaces. Once production starts, the production designer is always kind of one step ahead of the company. And so I'm always there at the beginning of the day to make sure that whatever set we're shooting that day is right and that everyone's happy with it, and kind of get it signed off. And then I'm off to the next place where we might be painting or dressing or building, and I'm kind of overseeing that to make sure it's ready so that when they get there the next day, it's right for that. So most of our work happens during the prep portion and the scouting portion. And then once you're into shooting, the director and the DP work more kind of hand in hand.
I remember when we first met the first time in Los Angeles, we all had this one reference of a book, Nan Goldin's Battle of Sexual Dependency. My cat wants to be involved. And so we had some similar references in terms of color palette and style, and that was really encouraging. And once the production office was opened, Jonah had this one room separate from the rest of the production office, and the whole thing was filled with references, and I would just close the door and sit in there and just envelop the energy of the room and the visual references, and really helped me get away from all the details of production, which take us over so often. There's so many details that we don't always get to think about the art. And I remember, Jonah, you would open the set every day, and when you were about to leave, it was like, oh, goodbye, I'll see you tomorrow. It's like, so because it was so much fun working together, and
Yeah, I remember we would talk on set sometimes, and usually when someone's shooting, you don't get a phone call, but I think you're the only DP where we actually would talk during production. You would call me between takes, say, what's going on with this, or we're doing this next, what do you think? And it was just so great to keep that. So even though we don't have much of a relationship going when production starts, we actually did maintain that, and we really loved working together.
Jonah, it might be a good time now to actually show some of your research, the palette, and we already have so many wonderful comments and quite a few questions, so I'll get to those in a minute.
So what we're looking at, there's a few different things. Nancy was talking about this room that in my office, we're so used to just sourcing photos digitally and emailing them to each other or putting them in albums online. But I really love printing things out and putting them up on the walls so that when people come into the office and we're working together, we can point to stuff and look at it and look at this shot and look at this color and look at how these drapes are done, or just having it up and aware. So we had all this research up in the office that we could all go to. And then after I do my research and we're kind of location scouting, I like to define what our palettes are going to be in the film. And I like to sort of define different palettes. So the first slide that we just saw, this slide, this was the beginning of the film. So this was the color palette for the 1950s when Robert was growing up, when he was a young boy in Floral Park, New York. And so these are a guide that kind of go to everyone in wardrobe, to Nancy, to props, to set dressing, to makeup, to anyone who's contributing visually to the look of the film. They'll get these palettes and they'll know for each section what the palette is for that section. So for this first section, it was lots of warm oranges and browns and kind of real earth tones. And then if we can forward to the next slide, this was when Robert first comes to New York, and this was a very kind of like 60s aesthetic, and a lot of the representation of New York that we found of photographers and people working in that time were sort of in this world of this blue and green, and we have a little bit this like maroony brown and beige, but again, it's like a 5 or 6 colors that we're going to kind of stick to for this portion of the film for everyone that's working on it. We can go to the next one. This represented when Patty and Robert moved into the Chelsea Hotel in that section of the film. So we're starting to bring in more vibrant colors. They're kind of getting more into the city. They're experiencing more in life. They're diving a little bit more into their artwork. So we wanted to bring out some of the reds and some of the greens and introduce some new colors in this section of the film. The next one. This represented when Robert was at his Oasis loft and his Bond loft. So these went into more browns and black and whites. We did a whole loft in black and white, kind of as an ode to his photographs that we can talk about later. And if we go to the next slide, this represented all of the street scenes in New York. So whenever we were out on the street, we kind of wanted to stay within this palette of this sort of red and yellow and black and kind of keep it to that. And then the next one. This was when Robert kind of had found his success and we've entered a new decade, and it was the 80s, and we kind of went more monochromatic. with just sort of whites and blacks and this rust color. He was in a very industrial loft. Again, it's very monochromatic. Little bit of a touch of purples in here, a little bit of a touch of reds in here, but very sparingly. So these are just sort of the goalposts of sort of like what we want to stay within as we're working on the film that everyone can always refer back to. And what that gives you is sort of a cohesive look with your lighting, with your set design, your painting, your wardrobe, and everything kind of is all playing in the same field. And it kind of gives you that really 70s streamlined, crushed palette look if you sort of intentionally say, these are the colors we're going to use for this section and this section and this section.
I do want to say we shot backwards. We ended up having to shoot the 23rd Street loft first because that is when Robert had contracted AIDS already and he was losing weight and, you know, really suffering. So that was a tricky location. It didn't end up being on 23rd Street, but it was one of the few in Manhattan. Manhattan has so many issues today with areas you can't film, but this was sort of in the garment district, and it was way up on the 11th floor, 10th or 11th, and windows all around, which was tough, you know, for cinematography because we were so high up in the buildings across the street, we couldn't really put lights on their roof, you know, to shine sunlight in. And I really just had to do a light study and work with Ondi and the first assistant director on how to stage so that I could work with the light that was already there. It was tricky, and plus everything was white. But as Jonah said, we did a beautiful monochromatic feel, and I think it really worked out. That location being tricky, you know, I was finally happy. But we did that first, and you know, that's hard for an actor. But Matt Smith pulled it off. He was amazing. Yeah, and then got to eat. He had to lose 20 pounds before we started shooting. That's why we had to do it first, so then he could eat.
And then he went on to play Prince Philip.
Yes, he did.
Crown. Yes. So Chris from 3400 has a question, Jonah, about the change in color palette. Is it related to sort of a thematic transition? Are you thinking about the transition of the time period or the themes as they relate to the script when you're developing the color palette? Or are you really going with research and observing the time period and reflecting that, or a combination of both?
You know, I think it's a combination of both. I think in a film like this, and I've done many films like this where you're working in multiple decades, it's a very easy way to divide up what your palettes are going to be distinguished by. I'm working on another project right now, a television show that I'm designing, where we have a different palette for each character because each of the episodes is told from a different character's point of view. So there's different ways you can go about dividing it. So with Mapplethorpe, one sort of reason why I chose the different palettes was the research, was sort of in all of my favorite photographers of the 60s of New York, what did it look like? What were the themes? And then all my favorite photographers of the 70s, what did it look like and what were the themes? And you sort of start to pull out these patterns and these themes. And then also, you know, character development and themes play into it. So doing brighter colors when they get into the city and they're at the Chelsea Hotel and when they're sort of in their artistic prime, or going into a more monochromatic world when Mapplethorpe's really known for his black and whites and it's the 80s and it's a bit more severe and a bit more cynical. So I think you take both of those things into consideration, research and theme, when you're deciding how to break up your palettes.
Yeah, so Liz had a question along those lines, and this is for both you, Nancy and Jonah. Of course, did you have to study, she asks, but Mapplethorpe's photographs before starting the shoot, and was it daunting to be working on a project that, you know, was through the lens of this famous photographer? And then Connor added to that question, did Mapplethorpe's photography influence the style and feel of the cinematography? And there's one more question I just want to add to that, because there's sort of this theme going on around the questions. Were there, that John Ha has, were there any difficulties in recreating Mapplethorpe's photos or any of the artwork shown? So yeah, maybe we could spend a little time talking about Mapplethorpe, you know, how he came through the film and what you needed to do in order to make that happen. And also, were all those original pieces that were shown, did you have to get them, were they licensed, or what was the deal with that? Nancy, maybe you can start.
I'll just start with the recreations, because we were obviously shooting behind the subjects so that we could make a cut to the actual photographs. It was actually done very quickly. We immersed ourselves in knowing everything about Mapplethorpe. I had lived in New York during the late 70s and 80s. I was familiar with his work, but you know, there were documentaries, so many books, and we just immersed ourselves. And I wouldn't say it was, I mean, it was actually a joy to be able to tell the story of Mapplethorpe, because so many people today don't know who he is. And he was a major art influence way back, and especially very controversial with his photographs. I mean, there were lawsuits. The owner of a gallery in Cincinnati was put in jail. You know, people just don't even know who he is. So I was so thrilled that we could share his life. And also, it just wasn't all a pretty life. You know, we were brutally honest with how his personality changed and his relationship with his brother. And so Ondi, who, by the way, wrote, I don't know how many drafts of the screenplay, was very cognizant not to glorify him, the person, the photographer.
You know, we got so immersed in Mapplethorpe, and I've always been a huge fan. But we had the incredible opportunity to work hand in hand with the Mapplethorpe Foundation, who is in charge of all of his work and archiving it. And we got to go to the archives and see his original work, because we didn't only do his photographs. A lot of people don't know, but he started as an illustrator at Pratt. And so we were recreating a lot of the things that he drew in the first part of the film as well. So we had to learn all about that. We had his actual printer print from the digital files the photographs, and when the Mapplethorpe Foundation saw them, they couldn't believe they were so real that we basically had to keep them under lock and key and then give them back to them for educational purposes, because they could have been sold as fakes, and they said they wouldn't have even been able to tell. So the photos that were actually handled and were in close-up were actually printed by Mapplethorpe's printer, who actually printed for him. We got to meet him.
He was in a movie. We put him in the movie.
Exactly. And he's in the film. He comes in the scene. The stuff that was on the walls or in background shots, we just printed regularly, but had to have a lot of security policies in place so that nobody ended up walking off with one, because we printed hundreds of his photographs. I mean, hundreds of his photographs. And it was pretty incredible. The foundation, it was just a dream to go there. It's a magical place. I mean, he's forever preserved in this really cool building in Chelsea, where you kind of wonder what other artists are preserved in there. And it's just this incredible place to go to. They open the door and it's temperature controlled, and all of his archives are there, his sculptures, his paintings, his photographs. And it was really incredible, and developed a really wonderful relationship with the people at the foundation.
And they liked the movie, which is so important.
So there's another question about, since there were a lot of dark subjects that are covered in this film, did it sometimes seem daunting to tackle this movie, or did it inspire you, from Will? And then also, to add to that, Megan asks, what parts of the film are you most proud of and why? So what inspired you? You know, what are you most proud of? And was it hard to go into that dark space and unearth this story?
I mean, I think that all of the beauty in art comes from conflict and comes from drama. So to me, I always lean into those things. And that's I think Mapplethorpe was a tortured artist in a way, and that's what brought out the beauty, and that's what allowed him to develop this look and this voice that's unlike anyone else's. So to me, that was something I always leaned into and wanted to explore, sort of the underside and the dark side of New York and the dark side of this this genius creator.
Agree. Yeah, that wasn't daunting to me. In terms of my favorite parts of the film, I'm just thrilled that we pulled off what we pulled off. There would be days when we just had to do so much and we got it done. And 12-hour days. It was intense. I'll tell you what my major regret was about the movie, and the producers were very worried that Patti Smith would sue them. She has really not wanted any films to be made about Robert. She's very protective. And there had been an attempt by another company in New York to do a biopic, and she shut them down. She wouldn't be in his documentaries. And, I love her work, her art, her music. I mean, I love seeing her live. So that was something to contend with. And when it came to shooting and then editing, they were very careful not to put too much of Marianne Randon in the movie, who played Patty. That was a disappointment. In terms of favorite, oh God.
And there were so many locations, it's almost hard to have a favorite. We were at a different one every day, it seemed like. I mean, but we got to shoot at some really iconic New York places. We shot at the Met. We shot at the original Whitney, which is
the
now
Whitney. That
no one's ever been allowed to shoot there. We were the first film that's ever shot in that lobby with those iconic lights that they have. So, it was a very challenging film. There's no doubt about it. It was without a doubt one of the most challenging films I've ever been on. But there were these moments where we would look at each other, Nancy and I, and be like, we're shooting at the Whitney. We're shooting at the Met. This is incredible, and just it's important to take those times to just kind of realize that and take stock of it.
I also have to say there was a bit of a struggle in pre-production to be able to shoot Super 16. The producers just were so worried about the costs, and we had to really, do our own breakdown and show that it really wasn't going to be that much more expensive. What really sealed the deal was, we went to all of the vendors. I came up in the New York world, so I was very close to Technicolor, and they really helped us out. And if Kodak had not opened that film lab in New York the year we shot, a few months before, it wouldn't have happened, because what was happening is all the film labs have been shut. Everything in New York had closed down by that point. There was one lab left in LA. There's one in Atlanta. Not sure what you guys have there, but things were very depressing. And then Kodak opened the lab. I remember it was Spielberg right before us and Scorsese right after us. And, we were the little 16 mil. We never knew exactly when we were going to get dailies. And I do have to say, for you tech people out there, we could only afford to scan in 2K. It never went to 4K. And, it's fine. We embraced that look, the grain and the grit. It's got so much texture. And I'm so relieved that we were able to shoot in Super 16. I used old lenses. It was all the Zeiss Super Speeds, which were from the period. It was a modern camera, although not made anymore because nobody's working in film. It was the Arri 416, which had come out at the beginning of digital, and that was the end. There aren't even that many of them around. I'm an Aton owner, and this camera was very much based on the Aton. It was small. I could jump into the car, like the limo, just quickly without cables and all that. And, it was so small, I could just be there, and even a small car, it worked. I did operate. I don't always get to do that anymore, especially in television, because even though we were working fast on Mapplethorpe, television is very fast, and I need to be near the writers, the showrunners, directors, and we're always using 2 cameras. Luckily, as time went on in the shoot, and our extras were larger, a larger group at openings, we were able to get a second camera because we weren't getting enough coverage in, just 12-hour days, which 19 days, and all these locations and all the scenes. So I was really happy when we demanded to get another camera. I do have to say it was great looking through an actual eyepiece where you're looking at the image and seeing the actors, and it's not on a monitor. So I love shooting film, and it's very fast because the video tapes are terrible. Nobody's looking at those horrible monitors, and in digital, we're all like looking at every minute of the day, people discussing, let's do that. That's too dark. Why are you doing, a lot of cooks in digital. And yet Ondi was right there next to me, and it went very fast and very smoothly. So I was happy.
So mostly, Nancy, you've addressed this, but Alex Beck, he was asking what went behind the decision to shoot on Super 16. Did you motivate that conversation? Was this something that you said you thought was important, and that you maybe sold yourself as someone who has worked in film and who could handle this? And maybe you could also talk a little bit about your background working in film, what films you've shot on film, and kind of, yeah.
The period, Robert worked before the digital age. So it was a no-brainer. And Ondi was a Super 8 filmmaker, so she loves film. And there was just no question this is what we had to do. Jonah, I'm sure you remember when we were trying, to make it happen. It was tough. It was really touch and go with the budget. I came up in film. That's what there was. I did a lot of big music videos. We were shooting 35 in those days. I have a couple Super 8 cameras. I didn't go to film school. I earned while I learned. I came up in electric and lighting as a gaffer in New York, and I'm in LA now. Of course, we're hardly ever in LA anymore, and always somewhere else. But if you haven't seen, speaking of old films, one of my favorites that I ever shot was Neil LaBute's Your Friends and Neighbors. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's got to be 20 years old now. I don't even know, maybe not that old. But I shot on John August's film, The Nines. The film was in 3 parts, and one part was 35, one was 16, and one was digital. So I still get to shoot film now and again, but here's the other thing for you film versus digital people. It was such a shock to remember how slow film stops are, because we're used to, in digital, shooting 800 ISO, 1250, 1600, and the film stocks, the fastest film we had was 500. And even for that, I overexposed so I could get some rich blacks. I knew that I wouldn't lose the texture. So I was rating that 500 for my night interior and exteriors at like 320 or 400. So it was, we needed a lot of light. And because I didn't have a large crew or amount of equipment, sometimes the lighting has a 70s look, because it's we didn't have the big soft sources that we use today. And it was a different time. And of course, remembering to pull my light meter out at every shot. I use my light meter today in digital, but not a lot. I bring it out when I'm doing a scene and then to match. But for every shot, you need to bring your meter out. So that was remembering how it went in the old days. And yet I really thought because we weren't tied to the monitors, it went fast. We were able to move.
So there's a question here from Brandon. He's asking Jonah, who does the production designer talk to when gathering props, and how specific can they get with props and set design?
Okay, so underneath the production designer is the art director, the set decorator, and the prop master. And then underneath them are a bunch of other crew members. But basically how it works is your art director handles all of the construction and building and painting. So under the art director are the set designers. So you talk with the set designers about how you want to build sets. We didn't build anything. Well, we built the hospital room on a soundstage. We only did that because you have to build one set on a soundstage to get the New York tax credit. So that's why we did that. But we didn't have a lot of builds. So we did do other things like in the hotel room at the Chelsea Hotel, there was a room that we really loved, but it didn't have enough light. It did have 2 doors though. So what we did is we took out one of the doors and built a window into that door and lit from behind it. So that's something that the art director would do, the set designers would do. Next up, you have your set decorator who does all of the furnishings, drapes, everything that kind of fills up the set, and they come and do that. And then you have your prop master. And while the prop master is in some regards sort of their own department, it's a huge department. It's an incredibly important department. It's on set. It's really important that as a production designer and as a director that you're aware of props, because props seem insignificant and then they fill up the entire frame and they're what your actors are interacting with. And if there's not authenticity in the props and if the props don't look right, it can really throw off a whole scene. So it's really important to be involved all the time. And we always have prop meetings and what we call prop show and tells before scenes or when you're doing television before every episode, where you walk through with the director and the DP what every prop is, what it's look like. Is it going to shoot right? Is it going to be reflective? Is it too big? Does it need to be changed? Do we need to give it a foam one for safety? So it's an incredibly important part. So it's a good question for a production designer to keep tabs on, but also for a director to keep tabs on.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I often talk about that in screenwriting, that props are one of the ways in which you can communicate something about the character or about the situation that your character's in, or the qualities in if they're quirky, or, if they like cats, if they like black cats that meow. So there's a question here from Will, also talking about the controversial life of Mapplethorpe. Did the production face some backlash? So it sounds like that you were able to, Patti Smith didn't get involved. You were able to get the film made. There's always going to be mixed reviews when you have a real person that you're trying to represent their life. But was there any backlash, really?
No. I mean, the foundation was on board. We made this in a time where making LGBT films wasn't an issue. I think Nancy and I have both worked in times when it was an issue, and when you did face backlash for telling these kind of stories. We've thankfully moved past that, so we didn't encourage or encounter any blowback in sort of that regard. So overall, it went pretty well. I think, getting the foundation involved was a really good call on the filmmaker's part. Having somebody behind you to give you sort of credibility is a really smart way to go when you're doing something about someone's real life.
I want to say, I was reminded when we were talking about the warehouse, which is so supposedly a soundstage in Brooklyn, where you built the hospital, how amazing it was and Ondi really pushed for this, the slides, to do a practical effect where he's feverish and you have the photos coming over the walls and on his face. And production really didn't want us to do it. I remember we were like behind the scenes trying to get somebody to go get another projector, and I had to get a friend of mine to put some images together. You know, it's just hardly charging us, a DP friend of mine. And, you know, it's one of my favorite scenes where we have two people holding two slide projectors and just moving it around on the walls. And Jonah, I have to thank you again for making that window at the Chelsea, because at the Chelsea room, because there was nowhere to light except frontal or silhouette. And, you know, they all thought I was crazy when I said I need side light, and you did it, and it worked out, and it allowed us to have some dimension to that room, which was very white. And, you know, there goes the cat, 5 feet. I mean, you could see wall to wall, and it was like, oh my God, how are we going to work in here? But it worked out, and the walls had this great cracking already, and I was worried.
Should we pull up some of your images? Maybe you can show us our images.
I'm wondering if I have that in there. Maybe I do. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Let's see. Also,
yeah, keep talking. We'll pull up the deck.
There are 2 cuts. So apparently, I think you saw the director's cut. For some reason, the producers didn't like Robert as a kid, and we shot in this church. Okay. We were turned down when we were looking for a church a few times, and we did find one to shoot in, and we shot. And then the producers had Ondi pull it from the film. It's now back. And, you know, I liked it because finally I got a big space to light, because otherwise we were in these tiny little places.
There's an image of the church, Nancy.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Jason's put up the image of the church.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And then there are a couple of those. I'm not sure how many are in that little. There's another one. So also it related to another important story point when Robert's father, who was a still photographer, sort of, I mean, not artistic, but he was technical, and he had a dark room. And when Robert's father saw these images that Robert had shot in the church, he forbade Robert to ever pick up a camera. And in fact, Robert was drawing, and from the time he was young, and again, as Jonah mentioned, from Pratt, and didn't pick up a camera till he was already living in the Chelsea. First was Polaroids. So anyway, we thought it was important, and I'm glad it's back in the film.
That church is breathtaking, Sam says.
Oh, that's so sweet. What else? What other images are up there?
Yeah, let's just start. Jason, do you want to start from the beginning, and we can click through them, and Nancy can tell us a little bit about it.
Some people didn't see the film, so maybe this will sort of. Okay, so you all who are shooting, you don't always get a chance to film the tests for the actors. And I was in this rental house, a small facility in Manhattan, and there was not even a room for us, but Robert and Matt and Marianne came, and we just quickly did these tests just to look at how they would be on camera. And I think we had them each for like 10 minutes, if that. And so it was just great to at least get to see what hair looked like, because Robert went through so many hair changes. I was just fooling around with color here. So again, when we saw, so this scene, I really loved this scene. It's very funny. And remember this house? It took a while to get this, Jonah, but it was
Yeah,
this
it sure did.
little tiny room, real house. And I'm really happy how it worked out. Somehow we managed to get 2 cameras in this tiny little dining room. So it worked out. There you can see Robert's hair again. This is the 80s. And this is day 1. I remember we had to go to the park, Central Park, and then run out to do these exteriors. And then I remember I had to jump in the car and do some other shooting through a window of it was the hot dog stand when Robert hadn't eaten. He had, pretty severe AIDS. And we did a little scene later on where he and his brother are eating hot dogs, but he couldn't hold it in. I remember that scene.
Can we get back to that image before? I'm wondering, Jonah, for you, the relationship between the production department and wardrobe, also decisions that are made about colors with wardrobe and that conversation.
Yeah, so Tom Broker did the costume design on this film. He's a legend in New York, and we talked very early on about our palettes that you saw earlier. So we were working in the same way. So he's always kind of aware of what I'm doing with the palette, so that we're kind of in sync when we do that.
We were so lucky to have Tom. Again, I've mentioned the budget was small, and there were so many wardrobe changes and looks, and he had this huge wardrobe collection. He'd done Saturday Night Live skits forever, and we were so lucky that he had at his, he owned all of this amazing, I don't know how much, warehouse of clothing. So we were really, really lucky. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, you can move on, Jason.
So here again, their wardrobe matches how the environment in Queens looked. So it was all of a piece. And this was right after that. Okay, here's the room. I think I did make you tone down the white, and everybody was so worried we'd lose all the cracks. But fortunately, it has a grungy look, and I was really happy. And that's one of the VFX out the window, because again, it was all green grass out there. We were up in the middle of the country.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your aversion to white?
Well, not that I'm averse to it. I mean, if everything's white, it's fantastic. But you can spend so much time on set or in your color correction taking the walls down because they just reflect more than any skin tone. And, you want your actors to be what's dominant in the frame and not a bright white wall that has no dimension. So,
yeah, I mean, if I could give one piece of advice for shooting films, especially if you're on a budget, from production design standpoint, if you can avoid shooting people in front of white walls, it's sort of the first thing as a production designer you learn. And I know you don't always have the opportunity to paint if you're doing low budget stuff, but if you can just choose a location where you're not in front of white walls, it will make your production value go up 100,000%. It's just something to always keep in mind. Now, as Nancy said, if you are doing it for a particular reason and you want everything to be white, that's a different situation, and you can embrace that. But what tends to happen is if you just shoot something in front of a white wall, it just looks like you didn't put any effort into doing anything interesting.
So this was interesting. This is that same mansion up in Yonkers, and we could not be any wider than this. This is supposed to be the lobby at the Chelsea Hotel because it just nothing would match. So this was as wide as we could get, but it had this great staircase, and so you made it work. This is more in that same bedroom. it's a little greener than it actually is in the movie. But again, the walls are not so bright that they're taking away from the actors.
So Nancy, obviously, for the color correction, the film's digitized and then color corrected digitally.
Yes. So again, we scanned from the negative directly to 2K, and that was what was taken into a DI suite, digital intermediate suite, and so it's projected large. This was at Technicolor Postworks, where we did moving parts.
Yeah. So are you always at all of the color correction?
Even if, all right, so I did a series in Atlanta called P Valley, by the way. I recommend it. It's on Stars. It's not for everybody, but it's got 100. Rotten Tomatoes is still 100 a year after. Well, we aired, I guess, starting in July. And by that time, when they were in post, which was in New York, I was already in LA doing another series and had to do everything remotely, live with my colorist in New York, who they sent in a link to the facility, one of the facilities in LA. And, we did frame by frame, just like we would if I had been in the actual room. And that's very common now. So I was happy that it's working out so well. And this was just, pre-COVID. And that's what's happening everywhere now. Everybody's working remotely. So the tools are there.
And you see that continuing even after COVID?
Yeah. Well, we're all over the place. So it used to be a difficult, I would have to fly on the weekend to places to try to, open up a facility so I could do the timing or whatever, so it's made it possible. I would go in before shooting, so it was early, just, to do the color, not really get a whole thing done. And then I would check it later on a color corrected monitor, if I didn't get to see everything perfect.
And Jonah, you're shooting, have you been vaccinated? But you just are following all the COVID protocol?
I am vaccinated, but we've been shooting for 7 months. We're doing over 120 days of shooting on this to do 16 episodes. So we're in our last 4 weeks. So we're in our home stretch, but we've shot the whole thing in COVID. We've only had to shut down once. We ended up shutting down for a false positive, so we actually didn't even need to shut down. But it's a very different world on set now, for sure. Everyone's in their face shields and much fewer people around. And when we go tech scouting and scouting, everyone drives themselves. And so a lot of that camaraderie is gone, unfortunately, but it'll be back soon.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're getting close to the hour. If there's anyone who has questions, burning desire to ask a question, please do so now. And I was also wondering, so Nancy was educated in the field. Sophia actually asked what was the most important thing you learned working in the field, Nancy. And then Jonah, you went to film school or art school, and then you studied internationally as well. Maybe you two could speak to that, since we have so many students in the audience tonight.
I guess I'll start. I have a psychology degree. It's actually really useful. We have to work with so many people, and you really have to figure out everyone's personalities and how to communicate with everyone. I'm happy I learned from the ground up. As I said, I started as PA and moved up from electric to best boy, and I was called a best boy, to gaffer, to DP, all in New York. I think if I'd been out here, I don't know if I'd still be shooting. Hollywood is a really tough place, but New York, as I've always said, is like the wild, wild east. And now you can start anywhere. I mean, people are shooting all over the world and every state, and you can get crews everywhere now. I used to, in the early days, I was able to, take my key people. I don't need to do that. I mean, when I went to Atlanta for 5 months on P Valley, I only took my one A operator, Steadicam op. The rest, everyone else was local, and I had a great crew. I'm glad that I learned the right way when there was money and time. Even when I started shooting, my shooting schedules were much longer. When I first moved to LA from New York, because I'd been shooting like 30, 35-day movies, and they were small. The first film I did, because I kind of had to start all over, was a Roger Corman movie. And I remember it was 18 days. It was like, 18 days? And it was 3 6-day weeks. And after it was over, I said, I'm never, ever, ever going to do an 18-day movie. Well, I've done 2 15-day movies since. And, Mapplethorpe was 19. I've done a lot of 19s. For a while, it was 25. You'd have 5-day weeks. And these small budgets, because I still like to do all my friends' indies, you lose shooting time. And that's unfortunate, because we want the directors to be able to have as much time as possible on set with the actors. So I don't know if that answered your question.
that was good. Jonah, how about for you in terms of your education and how it's informed your work now?
So I did go to film school. I went to Emerson in Boston. I also got a chance to study art history in the Netherlands, and then I did a semester in Prague where I studied at the Film Academy there. And I would just say, I think it's really important. A lot of people go to school for directing or for writing, and I think it's important when you're studying film. I always art directed things when I wasn't directing, and that's what I've ended up kind of becoming my career. And the only thing I wish I would have done differently is just trying out even more departments and working in the camera department and working in the costume department. And I think the more you can sort of immerse yourself in other people's projects and try out different departments, it will only serve you, even if you're looking to direct, it will only serve you better when you kind of get out into the real world and you're working, if you have an understanding of what these other people do. I think that's the most important thing.
Jonah, remind me to tell you that when I was a junior in high school, I lived with a Dutch family and lived in the museums.
They're pretty great there.
Rijksmuseum. I mean, yeah. So it's a great education for all of you. My mom was a docent at the Detroit Institute of Art. I have a history of art minor. It's really important, no matter what you're doing, as he said, to immerse yourself in art and photography and, look at natural light, look at how light falls in the world, inside, outside, and also, magazines with fashion and how artificial light is used. So there's so much you can just learn from being out in the world, whether it's in an art museum or just in life, in nature. Have a life.
Have a life. Enjoy your life. You have stories to tell. So Brandon has a question just for fun, he says. How might a production designer and cinematographer work together to stretch a micro-budget film, $10,000? I'm thinking my film was considered micro-budget at $230,000, but so this is a micro-budget film, $10,000 into a feature-length project. Have either one of you worked on a $10,000 feature film?
I don't think I have, but I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head by asking both of us how we would work together. And I think if I was doing a $10,000 movie, I would really want my production designer and my cinematographer to figure out what the plan was.
One location.
Yeah, exactly. Is it one location? Is it we're only doing this or we're only doing that? Or, really not trying to do more than you can, but coming up with a plan of like, how are we going to make this work? On this film, on Mapplethorpe, I think we originally had 90 locations and we had to cut like 20 of them. And
we had more than 19 days. We had to give up some days.
Right. So, you always have to make sacrifices. It's better to plan ahead and come up with a really good concept that works for your budget level, as opposed to trying to do, Avatar on $10,000 and being surprised why it's not working,
Good point. Good point. One location and be realistic about your budget, right for your budget. And I mean, so much of this conversation has been about collaboration and how many collaborators there are on a set and how important those collaborators are to making the life of the film and the film, come into the vision.
One other thing I would say really helps is, even if you're not in one location, if you have 5 locations that you can shoot in one location, if you find some great house or some great facility where you can do a restaurant scene and a house and an office and an outside without having to move the company and without having to dress anything, if you can just land one place. And we even did this on Mapplethorpe. We shot both the restaurants, for instance, in one restaurant, which we just dressed one corner of it differently. So that can really kind of help you stretch your resources as well.
Also, that mansion, there was this empty pool. We shot a whole scene there while we were shooting in some of the rooms. We shot exteriors, restaging a still shoot that was supposed to be in California. So again, multiple locations, I agree. And not too many cast members if you're shooting on 10,000.
So this is a question I think that's always on students' minds when graduating from school, moving to New York or LA. This is Katie who's asking this question. What things can we do to get jobs and work in the industry, especially if you're not necessarily connected already or have a connection who can get you a job?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think, first of all, you're probably more connected than you know. You probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone who's in the industry. I get emails all the time from people who are looking to come out and work, and most of my colleagues that I know really do try to answer those emails. And we used to go to lunch with people. Now we have a Zoom or we have a phone call. Don't be afraid to reach out to people, even if you don't know them or you don't feel like you're connected to them. The worst you can do is not get an answer, but most of the time you will get an answer. It's sort of part of the culture of Hollywood to help people that are coming in, because none of us would have a job if we didn't get the same treatment. So I would say really try to find your connection. You do have one. You may have to dig hard for it, or you may have to cold call someone that you like their work, and you might have to find their email and get a little stalkery, but the worst that's going to happen is they're not going to respond. But I've helped out countless people get internships or jobs that have gone on to build full careers in Hollywood just based on somebody emailing me or calling me and asking for a little help getting their foot in the door.
It's also a great time with the internet. And there are so many sites. And like if you're in New York, you could go to Independent Feature Project, IFP. In LA, it's called Film Independent. Actually, IFP became Gotham recently. So there are these organizations that have message boards. If you can find a way to save some money so you can afford to work for free, you will meet a lot of people. Also, like if it's New York, Columbia doesn't have a technical school, but they make films, so you can offer your services there. Whereas, NYU and School of Visual Arts, they have, most of their films are crewed up within, but not necessarily. But the more people you meet, if you have a way to support yourself, the better. Again, Atlanta, it's booming. I have many friends that left here and in New York to move there, and they're working much more than they ever did in the big cities here. New Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. Anywhere. Well, New York has tax incentives. Not so good here in California, and so many places. Like you'd be surprised all over the country. So you don't necessarily have to go to those two cities. And Canada, booming.
Festivals are another great way to meet people. volunteering for a film festival or a film society like Nancy talked about. You're going to meet people. You're going to get to meet people that are working in the industry. Volunteer at your local film festival. See who you meet. There'll be an inroad to meet somebody else. There's great opportunities in Boulder I know of. There's great opportunities in Denver. There's a great film festival. So, you know, there are resources for you. You just got to put yourself out there.
Also, if for any of you in the technical areas, go to the rental houses. You're going to meet a ton of people checking out gear, you know, whether lighting, camera, whatever, you know. You'll meet crew, and they'll, you know, you tell them you want to shadow. So there are a lot of ways now, and there's so many, Mandy, I mean, there are a lot of online sites. And, you know, Facebook has some groups, probably message boards, so it's a lot easier. I came up in the dark ages before we had cell phones. How we did production without cell phones, I don't know, but we did.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, I'll give the comment section just a moment to see if there are any other questions. But Nancy and Jonah, it's been wonderful to have you with us and to talk about this beautiful piece of work that you both contributed to. We really enjoyed watching it and hearing about your experience making it. So Nancy will be joining our producing class on Friday. And yeah, Jonah, if next time you're in town and when we're back in person, we'd love to have you come to the University of Jackson. That would be really wonderful.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you on Monday. For those of you who are still in the audience, there is a first person cinema happening. Alex Rivera will be with us on via Zoom, and Jason will be sending out information to the Cinema Studies listserv for that. So looking forward to seeing you all there.
All right,
Thank you.
Right.
Good questions, everyone. Wish we could see you all in person next time.
I know.
Jonah, great to see you, Jonah, and
good to see you,
Emily.
Yes,
great.
Thank you. All right. So Jason's actually going to turn us off. We can stay on for a moment.
Good.
All right.